I'm JP Tuesday.
And I'm Kiki Cannon. As lifelong Disney fans, the work of countless talented Disney creatives have shaped our lives.
Now, as the Disney catalog expands, we're taking a journey through film and television to discover if that spark that shaped us as children lives on in adulthood.
Does your favorite Disney media still cast that same spell? Join us as we find out. We are Rewatching the Magic.
Hi, Kiki!
Hi, Tuesday.
We are continuing our look at Marvel before Marvel Studios. This week, we're going to be taking a look at The Punisher, the 1989 movie starring Dolph Lundgren. This is one that's kind of an odd one. It was filmed in 1989 and released internationally in 1989, but actually did not get a U.S. release until 1991, mostly because the studio was going through financial issues and couldn't afford a U.S. release. So for me, I always see this as an early 90s movie because that's when I saw it, and not a late 80s movie, even though that's what it is.
I always think of it as the 80s Punisher because at best it feels like an 80s movie. We'll talk about how it starts and I'll get to why I feel like that. But while we're talking about that, who was that company that was maybe having some trouble there while they were making this film?
That would be New World Pictures. We mentioned them last week, and because at the time of doing this movie and the movie we talked about last week, Trial of the Incredible Hulk, New World Pictures actually owned Marvel Comics and were going to make movies and TV shows based off the Marvel characters. Yes, at one point, there was a studio that wanted to make TV shows and movies about Marvel characters. What a concept!
We have mentioned it in previous episodes, but if you're a newer listener, New World is the company that was started by Roger Corman and his brother after they left American International Pictures, which I think we last talked about American International Pictures when we talked about Ed Wood, because it was one of the companies that he worked for. So, yeah, Roger and Gene Corman, they put together New World Pictures when they left American International in the 70s sometime. And then I think the whole thing had fallen apart before the year 2000. Sometime in the late 90s, I think it became like super defunct and was eventually sold to Fox and then eventually to Disney. So there you go.
Yeah, a large chunk of New World stuff was sold off to 20th Century Fox. Some of it ended up in the possession of companies that would eventually get bought up by Shout Factory, as we talked about last week. According to my research, this particular movie was a part of the library that got bought up by Lionsgate. This movie might be owned by Lionsgate these days.
Well, to be honest, it's kind of hard to say who owns what, as there's kind of only two ways to watch this movie right now, and we might as well go ahead and get into that. Dear listener, if you are trying to watch this movie, you can either buy it on physical media. As always, we suggest if you're able to buy things on physical media, do that and preserve them. There was like a Blu-ray, it's never been like remastered or anything, so you're going to get the same quality, but it was sold on VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray over the years, at the very least, maybe some other formats as well. But it has never, as far as I know, been sold to a streaming service, and in fact, nobody seems to care enough about this movie to have even uploaded it to a certain tube of the U's and their digital content flagging system, because if you know where to look, you might be able to find it there at time of recording. Just saying.
Yeah, and it's not on digital anywhere. It's not on streaming anywhere. you would think with the popularity of the Marvel movies that whoever owns this movie would want to get some sort of financial compensation from that, but no. And yeah, no one seems to care that this movie is yeah, if you know where to find it, you know where to find it. I will say no more because I do not want to get this user in trouble. Although it's been on for a few years, so I don't think anyone cares.
Yeah, I will go ahead and say that even though you can get it on physical media, sometimes it's a little difficult and or slow, especially right now at time of recording when people who live in the US are having problems getting things with shipping and tariffs and
I will throw that the physical media does have a director's cut attached to it. I do not know if the version we saw was the director's cut. Probably not, because it was only 90 minutes.
I don't personally know a huge uh difference between what came out in the theater and what ended up on the, eventual like DVD and stuff. There is an extended work print and stuff, but like so far as I know, I've never seen that version. I'm pretty sure that what we saw was the theatrical cut, but given how long it was and everything, um most of how I saw this film over the course of my life was that the Sci-Fi Channel, later the Sci-Fi Channel, yes, I will pronounce it that way because that's the way you freaking spelled it in your logo. They used to play it, and the only things they really cut out were the fact that Dolph Lundgren begins and ends the movie in basically the same nude shot where you can see his butt a little bit. Apparently, those little meditation scenes where like Frank suddenly has this like desire to meditate in the nude was like a reaction to a lot of these action stars, these beefcake stars had been appearing nude on film in some form or another. Like Schwarzenegger had done it in Terminator at the very least, and I think at least one other film where you can kind of just see it like from the side, and it's all kind of you can like basically show it on TV unedited. But and then Stallone was you know like one toe into the adult film market at one point.
Yeah.
So he wasn't terribly shy about showing his form uh there at in the 80s and stuff. And I mean like I'm never going to blame the guys like, it's like if I had like a chiseled body like theirs, it'd probably be like, okay, if I can make money off of that, I'd be doing it too, like okay, you did that much in the workout to get that physique, you choose what you show.
And it's really interesting because Lundgren bulked down for this role. Like, just 2 years before he was in Masters of the Universe, and look how buff he looked in that film, and look how not so buff he looks in this film.
I mean, he is still like absolutely cut in this film, but yeah, there is a difference between like the huge bulk of, and I mean, you can look at it with current Marvel movies, like
Mm.
every single male star that's on there has a quote unquote superhero physique, but some of them have put on like lots of muscle bulk, and then some of them have worked for like muscle definition to get like a more lean kind of cut look. And Dolph Lundgren has done both over the years. And this is more his kind of like lean look, as much as he ever had one, because he is a pretty large framed guy. I don't think
Mm.
you're ever going to get skinny Dolph Lundgren as an adult just from the way his frame is built, But you see if you're just used to seeing him like in the Rocky movies or whatever, you're just like, oh, it's just Ivan Drago, or it's just He-Man or whatever, then you're used to seeing like the bodybuilder, like really bulked up Dolph Lundgren, and this is him that's more like, yeah, he's a multiple black belt in karate. He's a little bit more the like leaner action star in this one. And he's kind of almost unrecognizable, because if you know him at all, you really think of him as that, like, I mean, he is Swedish, and you think of him as that, like, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, like, very Nordic look to him.
Yeah, and he has his hair dyed black in this movie. He has a well, he tries to grow a beard, but it's just it looks like really bad makeup. Like someone tried just rubbing mascara on his face to make it look like he has a beard.
Yeah, it looks like somebody just attacked him with a stipple sponge. It's supposed to look like grizzled 5 o'clock shadow, but the problem is, if you are someone who grows facial hair, or someone who's ever worked with, like, any sort of like makeup or hair for film or or TV, you're gonna know this. Like, it's almost impossible to dye 5 o'clock shadow because it's literally like, a day's growth of facial hair. So you would literally be going through like the dyeing process every single day of like, 1 millimeter of hair growth.
Mm.
And so if he's got light hair to begin with, even if he grows a beard, it's going to be, light colored beard. And Frank Castle, in most of his forms that he was known for at the time, was drawn clean shaven, but maybe sometimes he would have a 5 o'clock shadow. And so they were trying to go for that like grizzled look.
Like, it would be like, make the wrestling references when Hulk Hogan became a bad guy, and that beard he had with the yellow mustache. Look how bad, it looked real bad even in retrospect. Even then it was like, what are you doing, man?
Yeah, and no, and it's a good thing, because you can dye a beard, and dyed beards can look good, but you have to let it grow out a bit. It's the same thing of like, it's really hard to dye a buzz cut on the top of somebody's head, you know?
Mhm.
Because it just like, if you want to keep it like that, like really tight, close, barely there kind of, little bit of hairline, you're gonna be, trimming it with clippers either every day or every other day, or maybe like once a week. And that's a lot of dyeing to do. If you grow out like a nice big full beard and then you dye it a certain color, you can leave it like that for months. It's like, it's fine. It works just like the hair on top of your head then. But it's so, yeah, that's kind of the one thing about the way that they worked him physically. And then of course the other big thing, you want to get into it about the costume?
What costume? He does not wear the traditional Punisher costume. Now, when you say the Punisher costume, modern fans would think of it's just a skull t-shirt and a trench coat, but this was still before that. This was, before that changeover happened, where he's still wearing the full black leotard with the skull that connects into the pouch belt with the white gloves and the white boots. So it's like I understand if they did not want to go in that direction for the film.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of who was drawing him at that time, because I mean, it's like, I know it was like Ramita Senior, I think, did the character originally for Spider-Man, but by this point he had moved on and he was with some of the grittier artists, so it might have been like Frank Miller or something by then. So I'm Punisher in the comic books is I'm not super great about knowing all of his backstory and stuff like I am with a lot of the other Marvel lines. But I know that Frank Miller was doing Daredevil in the 80s, and there was a lot of crossover there, and I think he did a run and a redesign on Punisher as part of that. So I think that was kind of the look they were using. And if you watch, a lot of stuff, he was always meant to be a more, you know, and we've talked about it before, he was always meant to be the more, how do you put it? The more militaristic.
There's an old saying, if you want your Batman to kill, you don't want Batman, you want the Punisher.
Yeah, and that's kind of it. But I mean, you know, he was originally thrown in Spider-Man, and he wasn't like a good guy or even like an anti-hero when he first showed up. He was just like this assassin dude that would show up in Spider-Man occasionally to be like, "You'll never kill anybody, but I'll take out 8 people before you can stop me." Mwahaha, like he was that guy. And then he got a little more depth, I think, in the 80s. And they were like, kind of in the same way Deadpool kind of did when they were like, hey, all of these hyper violent action movies are coming out. Why don't we make the comics be a little more like that? And then eventually they were like, well, why don't we just put those comic guys into the movies and stuff. Dolph Lundgren apparently did not want to do this movie because he didn't know the comic book, and he just got a script that was called The Punisher, and he was like, yeah, okay, I get it, like The Terminator and The Punisher and the, okay, generic action movie script, whatever. Yawn, boring. But then he read it and he was like, oh, this guy's kind of a little bit different.
I get it. The outfit that he wears of a leather jacket and all that kind of does give off Terminator vibes. And I get what they were trying to do with this one. Again, Punisher is not a traditional superhero. So you don't have to play up again, we had not gotten the Tim Burton Batman movie yet. Well, actually, the Tim Burton Batman movie would have come out already by the time this movie comes out.
Yeah, but they were like making this movie, around that time. So like what little, if at all, it was influenced, it really wasn't. You can see from the beginning of the movie when you're watching the opening credits, this really owes a lot to one earlier action films of the 80s, because there is a lot of like, you know, what if Dirty Harry had an extra bad day, because they go with Frank Castle being former police officer in this as opposed to a military background. So he's just a cop. And then, you know, crime lords do bad thing to cop. And, he goes on a vengeance streak. But, so it was taking from those like earlier 70s and 80s, you know, cop on the kind of crossing the line of the law things. And then the other thing it really takes from, especially if you watch the opening credits, are 70s exploitation films. Because the opening credit sequence looks like they lifted it right out of, like a really bad sequel to like, you know, Shaq or Superfly or something. Like it's
Like
really,
here is
really old.
like a standee of generic bad guy, and then there's the Punisher turning around and shooting it. Oh, it's behind glass, and the glass shatters.
Then it's like, it wipes to a different frame, and like Louis Gossett Jr. is standing behind a desk in the police department, like shaking his head, and then it'll like wipe to a different frame, and it'll be like, look, crime on the streets of New York City. There are women in short skirts who might be ladies of the evening, hint, hint, At least this one is supposed to be in New York City, unlike last week's film, which was taking place in Big Town, USA.
Another one of the things was that this movie was filmed in Australia. So if you know your Australian geography, you'll recognize a lot of the locations that they say are in New York are actually in Australia.
Yeah, specifically around the Sydney area. So if you've ever watched anything that's been filmed in Australia in and around the Sydney area, or if you're the type of person like me who knows that, certain people in the Australian, New Zealand roster of actors from around the late 80s, early 90s, you're going to start going like, wait a minute. Lanny Tupu is in this movie? Is this a pre-Farscape Lanny Tupu I see in this movie? What are you doing here? And then I was like, oh yeah, right. Filmed in Australia. Also, we have Barry Otto, is Miranda Otto's father. And if you don't recognize that last name, Miranda Otto, she is no man. Miranda Otto is, of course, Eowyn. So, yeah, she gets to kill the Witch King. Have herself a time with the hobbits out there.
Mm-hmm.
But this is her dad we have here as Shake, the weird alcoholic bum who speaks in rhyme and helps out Frank.
The former actor, as he says, the former thespian, he describes himself as. So he tries to quote Shakespeare and then he rhymes it. Double, double, toil and trouble. I got to get out here on the double.
Yeah. But like I said, Louis Gossett Jr. is in here as Frank's former cop partner, Detective Berkowitz. Detective Jake Berkowitz. Kind of the other one that you'll know, like, just depending on what kind of movies you watch, is one of our main villains, at least here, is Jeroen Crab. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Forgive me, my Dutch is not so great, but he is a Dutch actor who worked a lot with Paul Verhoeven before Verhoeven started making more US based films. And then also he was in at least one Bond movie. I'm forgetting which one. I think one of the Timothy Dalton ones. Uh and he did some other English language films, but he kind of, he's one of those European actors that came over into the American market kind of in the late 80s, early 90s. So he did a lot of TV and a lot of like independent films, and frequently, depending on the sort of stuff you watch, you'll get a like, hey, it's that guy out of him. So I think he was in Ever After, actually, but he had a smaller part. So I don't really think we talked about him that much. And then we do have a weird recurring thing from last week. You want to talk about that one?
Yeah, Nancy Everhard. We talked about her last week because she was like not Karen Page in Trial of the Incredible Hulk with Daredevil. She appears in this movie as Detective Sam Leary, Detective Berkowitz's new partner. And, again, Nancy Everhard, like a lot of the people in this movie, just does a lot of appearances in TVs and TV shows. And you say, hey, it's that person.
Yeah.
And fun fact, originally, again, we mentioned that this movie was filmed in Australia. Nicole Kidman was offered this role first before turning it down.
Yeah, and that is the only character that she could have played, really. So everybody assumes this is the character she was supposed to be.
Unless she was going to be playing Frank Castle's wife before she died.
I mean, maybe, but everything I've always read about it was that, like, Nicole Kidman was supposed to have, like, a big part in this movie. And there's only really, like, two big speaking roles for women. and the other one is played by Kim Miori. And if you know Kim Miori at all, if you're the same sort of nerd as us, you'll know her from Babylon 5 because she was Captain Hiroshi in Babylon 5. If you're not the same type of nerd as us, you might know her from like Jag or The Ghost
Uh,
Whisperer.
I know her from a movie that came out the same year this movie did, a little teenage comedy called Loverboy.
I've never seen that one. I have heard of it.
Yeah, Loverboy is about a teen that gets a job at doing a pizza delivery and ends up having an affair with older women. She was one of the women he was having affairs with.
Yeah, for some reason, whenever I walked into the video store, like just those kind of covers, I was always like, yeah, this is just not a movie for me. So I know her from Babylon 5.
Yeah. And her character, Lady Tanaka. I'm sorry, that is the only thing I can think of every time I hear her name in this movie.
There is a third woman in this movie other than the part of the like blink and you'll literally miss her because kaboom. But, of Frank Castle's wife there for about 20 seconds on screen. The only other woman of note in the cast was played by Zoska Elise. I'm hoping I'm saying that right again. She doesn't even have a Wikipedia page, and this might be her only film role. I don't know. I couldn't really find anything else on her. She plays Lady Tanaka's adopted American daughter. They specifically say adopted American daughter because Kim Miori is of Asian descent and Zoska Elise is very fair skinned, white descent from somewhere. I have no idea where she is. I know nothing about this woman. I tried to do research and I couldn't find anything. But she like literally like never speaks.
Yeah, they specifically say not only is she the adopted American daughter, she's the adopted American mute daughter.
Yeah, the exact words in the film. Yeah, she's the mute adopted American daughter of Lady Tanaka. And I'm like, okay, why are all those things together? Because I couldn't really figure out that she was supposed to be a character from the comics as far as I could
I don't think there's anyone from the comics in this besides Frank Castle.
Yeah, I don't think so either, because I couldn't really find where any of them, like I said, they changed Frank's background from he's no longer like special forces military. He's just a regular beat cop who ran afoul of a crime family and they planted something to go boom in his car. And instead of Frank getting in the car, his wife and two daughters, that's another change. Usually it's a son, but in this movie it's two daughters. His wife and two daughters got in the car and the car went up with Frank like trying to get his family out, like, the car doors were set to lock automatically or something, whatever, movie logic. But he's trying to get them out and he realizes something's wrong and his wife's like, what's going on? And then the whole thing goes up and Frank's nearby, so he's able to fake his own death. So everybody thinks he's dead for most of the movie, as far as like the police force has considered him like, lost in this incident along with the rest of his family. And instead he goes down to the sewers and becomes the Punisher. And even though this would be a perfect place to have a tie-in with the Ninja Turtles, no Ninja Turtles in sight. I am very disappointed.
Yeah, yeah. We don't get a lot of the characters that would be associated with the Punisher. We don't get Microchip, which has been part of his guy in the chair in almost every other adaptation of the Punisher, including the Netflix series for like one episode.
Yeah.
But like in the '90s Spider-Man cartoon, he had Microchip be his guy in the chair in the Punisher van. But like we don't get Kingpin. We get a Kingpin, but we don't get the Kingpin. We don't get Jigsaw. We don't get any of the other, whatever characters you associate with the Punisher from the comics, they're not in this movie at all.
And weirdly, even though the setup of this movie kind of would have been perfect to bring in a sort of Elektra, if not Elektra, then a character based on Elektra. Because she is, she's been in a lot of Punisher stories too, and of course, famously has had a relationship with him, in several different storylines, and I think in one of the multiverses, they're like married and have a kid or something.
Well, considering New World was already planning a Daredevil TV show at the time,
Yeah, but the thing is, they weren't really planning on using Elektra.
maybe.
I don't know. Yes, okay, maybe they didn't want to bring in Kingpin to this one because they'd just done Kingpin, like we talked about last week. That wasn't made too long before this. Um, and so maybe they don't want to use Elektra because they're like, well, if that Daredevil thing takes off, we'll use Elektra with Daredevil. I don't know, but there are other characters they could have brought in. They could have brought in like the Russian, that wouldn't have been too hard. But anyway, because this is really meant to be more just 80s action movie than it is Marvel superhero movie, he is just a cop who decides to go vigilante to fight the mafia and then later the Yakuza when the Yakuza try to, elbow in on the mafia territory in New York.
Generic is action movie. I mean, this is Dirty Harry. This is Cobra. This is Death Wish. You probably saw this movie with Steven Seagal or Chuck Norris or any other type of actor I could name. It was so cliche at this point that they were making fun of it. Beverly Hills Cop, Naked Gun, Turner and Hooch.
Yeah, weirdly, Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal were both up for this role. The most strange thing was that the person who was originally supposed to play the role was Christopher Lambert.
The Highlander.
Yeah. And that would have been really fascinating because I will say that while Dolph Lundgren does not have a great American accent, I can buy him more as former New York cop or former New York anything than I can buy Christopher Lambert, who to this day still can't do an accent beyond his kind of weird mix of I grew up bouncing between like several European countries and sound kind of vaguely French.
His French Canadian accent versus Lundgren's Swedish accent versus Arnold's Austrian accent. Yeah, apparently Arnold was considered, but he was too expensive.
Well, what's so funny is, yeah, Christopher Lambert was their first choice, and he got injured filming a different movie. I don't know which one. And then they considered Arnold, but he had, I think, just done The Terminator and became wildly overpriced immediately for this film. And then they were like, well, how about Chuck Norris? How about Steven Seagal? How about list off every single action star in the 80s that was even vaguely within their budget? And all of them said no until they got to Dolph Lundgren. And he was like, actually, the script's not too bad compared to what I usually read. So let's do that.
Can you imagine Charles Bronson as the Punisher?
That would have been a very interesting take. But, Charles Bronson was known for the kind of like cop on the wrong side of the law, sort of thing. This take of Frank Castle probably would have worked a little bit. This version of Frank Castle, I will give him one thing that I think a lot of people won't, is that because they had Dolph Lundgren, he is a little less gun-toady and a little more all-around action hero-y. He uses a variety of implements with which to dispatch his foes.
Well, like you mentioned, Lundgren is a legit martial artist. The same thing like if Seagal had played the role. It'd be, the hand-to-hand fighting.
Yeah, except most martial artists, I think, would pick Dolph Lundgren over Steven Seagal if you put him up in a martial arts fight. Even then, Dolph Lundgren, I believe, still to this day, could probably hand you your butt in karate. He is also incredibly smart, just as a human being. Steven Seagal, on the other hand, is a garbage person who I think that I could take in a fight.
I I've seen him recently at doing exhibitions, and like it's like, call wrestling fake, but those exhibitions are even more fake.
Yeah, I mean, he basically fights stuntmen at this point that are actually doing stunts. The goal in an exhibition in the last 10 years has basically been just him moving his hands, and basically stuntmen come up and throw themselves onto the ground in front of him and, scream loudly. But Dolph Lundgren, who even recently in the last few years had a bout with cancer, and fortunately, as of time of recording, has been declared cancer free and has come through that and is still making movies, and good for him.
And as you said, Lundgren certified. He's not just a martial artist action hero. He's a legit scientist.
Yeah, chemical engineer. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not just science. That's like some hardcore science. Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, he's still out there doing what he does. The thing is, though, is that he didn't realize, because I don't really think that he realized like the full like comic book stuff behind this. He thought this was just like a throwaway action film when he signed on to it. So he didn't realize things like he should have a big white skull logo on his chest. Or else he has said that he probably would have said something to the director like, hey, can we get me like a more accurate costume or whatever? And the director who actually made that call has said that the biggest regret he has for this film, of all the regrets you could have for this film, and there are many, his biggest regret is not just like, stamping a giant white skull logo on a t-shirt and putting it on Dolph Lundgren. Because in recent years, Dolph Lundgren has like really embraced the Punisher as a character and a legacy.
A lot of those cult movies that he did, like he's accepted his role, his position in the Masters of the Universe fandom. He's accepted that role within Marvel. So he's like, he understands that there are people who grew up watching these movies and fell in love with them. So
Well,
he
like I
can,
said, he's a smart guy.
he can go to those comic conventions and make a lot of money.
Yeah, and I mean, I know he does occasionally. I know he stopped for the last few years because he was, battling cancer, which is, let's give him that at least. But yeah, but the thing is he's done skits and stuff, even within the last few years, where he's like put on just a Punisher branded t-shirt and, like a black coat, and has been like, yeah, I'm Frank Castle, and look at me, I'm the Punisher, and, like recreated comic covers with fans and stuff. And it's been like really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you can't take that away from him. He was the first live action Punisher. I never really watched this movie all the way through before this. This is the first time I've seen the entire film, mostly because it didn't feel like the comic book Punisher to me. So when we decided that we were going to do this Marvel before Marvel Studios month, it was like, okay, we need to do something Punisher related, because right before we put all of this together, Disney Plus had announced that they were doing a Punisher special that's coming up a few weeks from the time of this recording. And of course, he's going to be in the new Spider-Man movie. So we have to do something Punisher related, and might as well do this original Punisher movie.
Yeah, I really campaigned for this one because this is kind of the Punisher movie I remember. I've watched this one more than I've watched any of the recent ones until like the Netflix stuff. You know, like once you got like the Netflix into the actual MCU proper, um, then like yeah, I've watched all that stuff. But as far as the standalone Punisher movies, I saw the first one that they made with Thomas Jane, isn't that his name? I saw that one and I was like, okay, this is an all right movie, but not a great movie. And then when it came around to Warzone, I was like, this doesn't even look like a movie I want to watch. You know, it had like John Travolta in it and not even like funny, you know, like bad movie funny looking John Travolta, you know? So I was like, okay, I'll skip that. But the Dolph Lundgren Punisher was what I came out with because it was one of those things that, like, you know, we've talked about a lot of the stuff that you watched over and over again just because it was on the Disney Channel when you were a kid. I watched this a lot because it was on Sci-Fi Channel all the time when I was a teen. And even though this is an adult film, you know, we're not doing our usual, like, oh, this is, you know, oh, it's so horrible and stuff that we've got to, like, send the kids out of the room or whatever, even though we're talking about a Punisher movie. Because even though it's probably like an R-rated movie, maybe, in the home release, I don't even know because I think this was the first time I'd ever seen the uncut version. And I was
Yeah,
like,
it is an
yeah,
R-rated movie.
but, you know, even though I you know, neither of us really felt the need to be like, "Oh, send the kids out for this one," because other than the fact that it's just like, well, depending on how much action, like 80s action, do you think a kid should be exposed to? I was exposed to way worse movies than this, even the uncut version, when I was a kid. And so this didn't feel like, you know, like if you caught Die Hard or something on TV when you were a kid, you would be like, "Oh, this is definitely an R-rated movie that they've cut stuff out of." But what's so funny is the way they edited around this for, like, Sci-Fi Channel, I think except for the beginning where they kinda cropped the he's doing that one nude pose where you see, like, a little bit of his backside, um, as he's meditating, like, at the beginning and the end of the movie, they would crop that, or I think maybe they put, like, a little blur or something, and that was really the only time where I was like, "Oh, this movie has been edited in some way," and then other than that, it's just, like, a couple of swears. But this is not a very gory or bloody movie.
No more gory or bloody than any other 80s action movie. Interestingly enough, there is somehow, and I'm not exaggerating, there is somehow less violence in this movie, this R-rated cut Punisher movie, than most MCU movies.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I was like, you know, if this were a just like a mainstream MCU movie today, this would just this would be on the, like, lighter end of, like, the Netflix shows, you know? Like, even with all the swearing and the nudity left in, you know, if you just threw this up as, like, a two-parter of one of the Netflix shows, you'd be like, "Oh."
We saw more violence in the episodes that have been released so far for Born Again Season 2 than this movie.
Yeah, that is true. The Punisher episodes that he shows up in for Born Again Season 1 are way more gory in, like, what they show the Punisher doing to his enemies than this does. This is very cartoonish 80s action movie violence. This is like watching like an early Jackie Chan movie or something, you know?
Yeah.
Even though there is a lot of firearm usage in this, there is not a lot of like blood packs or squibs or anything, you know, like you'll have the sound of it and occasionally you'll see like a squib or two go off on one of the stuntmen where they'll react and everything. But you don't really see a lot of like red, you know, just like as a
Yeah.
color.
I mean, the most kills in a single scene is when the Yakuza poison the mafia guys. And that's not even blood. She just poisons their champagne.
Yeah, and then they kind of convulse like a bad Shatner impression and fall over dead. You know, it's like they're not even like foaming at the mouth or anything. They just kind of go like, "Wait, you poisoned us? I am dead." You know, and then they fall over. Like it really is just like a really bad Shatner scene.
Yeah.
The funny thing about it though is that according to Caravan of Garbage, shout out to them over on YouTube,
Mr. Sunday Morning.
Mr. Sunday Morning. When they did this for the Caravan of Garbage series, you know, two Australian guys, Australian produced movie. One of the things they talk about is the body count in this movie. Apparently, he takes down 60 people on screen that they could count. And then we are told in the dialogue that before the movie starts, in the 5 years he's been in hiding as the Punisher, living in the sewers, he has taken out 125 people prior to the start of the movie. And then he takes out another 60 on screen during the course of the movie. So that's 185 people that are chalked up to Frank Castle alone in a 5-year period.
I mean, Castle says he ain't even done yet.
Yeah, he's like he leaves the movie, you know, like, and then the final scene of the movie, he's like, "Well, if there's bad guys, I'm gonna be there to punish them because you know I'm the Punisher after all." Cue title card, roll credits, you know, like. So it's like
Like,
this may have one of the most insane body count numbers up until you get to like Deadpool.
I don't even know this many people died in RoboCop.
I'm not sure Thanos took out this many people on screen.
Let's get into the actual plot of this because we've been doing this for almost an hour, and we've just, but yeah, like you said, the start of the movie starts that the mysterious vigilante known as the Punisher has been terrorizing the criminal underworld for 5 years, and it just happens to be the 5-year anniversary of the Castle family being murdered by the kingpin of the mafia, Gianni Franco, which is Jaren Crab's character. And he is exonerated at the court case on the 5-year anniversary. He was arrested, he's on trial, and he was exonerated, and he's a free man, and Frank decides, yeah, that's not going to happen. I'm going to take down your bodyguards, I'm going to take down your boys, I'm going to blow up your house.
I think it's his dad, isn't it? That was the former head of the Franco family, and then we see Gianni come in and like take over. Isn't that the first scene of
Yeah,
the movie?
something like that.
Yeah, this movie not a great plot. Let's just it's very thin and the plot is not great and it is not well told on screen. Also, the audio is crap. This is one of the worst mixed audios we've had, and we just watched like a made-for-TV Hulk movie last week.
And I don't know if this is how this movie was done or how we watched it.
Always remember this as just being like a really badly muddled movie, and I think half of it is the sound quality of the original movie was muffled, and the other half of it is basically everybody in this movie is not American pretending to have an American accent. Except for Kim Miori, who is American and is putting on like a sort of like vague Japanese-ish American accent. She's supposed to sound more Japanese, like born and raised in Japan.
So like Lady Tanaka's age is dubious in this movie because they say that she's 40 years old, but she also was orphaned in World War II. Those two don't line up.
Yeah, because this isn't a period piece. This is supposed to be taking place in like the 80s, given like, the technology we see around them and this sort of toys kids are playing with and stuff like that.
Yeah, because okay, so let's kind of bring this up here. So Franco is exonerated for murdering Castle's family. Castle goes after Franco. Franco escapes, and his boys are killed, and his house is destroyed. So, but at this point, the various mafia families of New York have been so decimated that they have no choice but to put aside whatever problems they have with each other, come together as a single family because there's literally not enough left to do anything else. And because of this power imbalance in New York, the Yakuza have decided to come in and kind of get the mafia to work for them. Hey, you work for us now because you have this vigilante that killed like 3/4 of your people. So now you work for me. Which is where we get Lady Tanaka coming in. And Franco goes through this whole thing of who Tanaka is. They say she was 40 years old. This is 1989. She was orphaned in World War II with her brother, got into the Yakuza, worked her way up. Her brother steals from the Yakuza, but at that point, she had enough influence to get him out of whatever trouble he had with the Yakuza. And then eventually, when she raises up the ranks to become the leader of the Yakuza, she kills her brother herself in retaliation for the stealing that he did previously. It's kind of to show you that she's a cold-blooded killer. If she'll kill her own brother, what she's going to do to us. I don't like that scene because it's the problem of tell, don't show. Especially when we do actually see the actual death of Frank Castle's family. We don't get to see any of this Lady Tanaka origin story, which isn't even real. Like I said, she's 40 years old in 1989, which means she would have been born in 1949.
The math ain't mathing, as the kids would say.
Yes, which means she would be born after World War II. So if she was 45 or 50, sure, I can buy this. But they specifically say that she's 40 years old.
I think it was just somebody was like, when was World War II? About 40 years ago? Yeah, we'll just make her 40. I think that was kind of all the brain power that went into this script, to be honest. Because there's a lot of things like that in this script where it's like, wait, how did they, and why would you, and what? So you got a lot of questions if you try to follow this script. This is a vibes only movie. Don't think too hard about it. It's vibes only, like, you want an 80s action movie that sort of has the Punisher in it? Watch this.
And like I said, this is generic 80s action movie. Like I said, you could put any 80s action star in this movie and it'd be the same movie. Cop gets pushed over the edge, his family murdered. Now he goes outside the law to get what he wants. It's like, yeah, that's every 80s action movie. And all the cliches are here.
In a world where justice has failed him.
Like, even to the point where it's like the Yakuza in an attempt to get the mafia guys, oh, you don't want to come to us, work with us willingly. Well, we'll force you to work by kidnapping your children. So Shake is like going like, hey, Frank, you may not have any love for these mafia guys, and neither do I, but what about their children? Yeah, you punish the guilty, but the children are innocent, which you would see in almost any 80s action movie. Like, yeah, the bad guy deserves to die, but not, what about their kid, their daughter, their son? Do they deserve to die? They haven't done anything wrong.
So we have talked about the guy who wrote this movie fairly recently. Without looking it up, can you guess what recent episode of ours we talked about the writer of this movie in? His name is Boaz Yakin.
That would be Remember the Titans, wouldn't it?
He was the director of Remember the Titans.
And also did Prince of Persia, which we did talk about a while ago.
Yeah. He wrote the screenplay for Prince of Persia. So, yeah, we've talked about him a few times before, but he did not direct this one. The director of this movie is actually better known as an editor. And as an editor, this guy is absolutely incredible. This guy was the editor for Terminator 2. But I mean, he was also the editor for, the original Terminator. But compare those two movies and you tell me which one has better editing. If you know anything about film editing, Terminator 2 is the superior one for that.
He was also the editor on Super Mario Brothers, the one we've talked about, but
Yeah,
also
I
like
mean,
RoboCop and Rambo and Commando and
yeah,
Halloween
there's
and
a reason why this movie actually has a crap plot, but kind of looks pretty dang good for a low budget 80s action film. I've seen
yeah.
way worse. We've talked about it before, but like these action films, kind of my jam, especially ones that were made outside the US. So I've seen tons of them, and this is actually like, you know, pretty good, fair to middling. It's like, it's in the upper half.
It's one of the better directed 80s action movies, especially a low budget 80s action movie.
Yeah, I will say that as far as Mark Goldblatt goes, I'd rather have him as a film editor than a director. I think he's better just at his editing work because the movies he's edited are absolutely some of the most banging movies of the 80s and 90s. I mean, even into the early 2000s, like, he did like the Bad Boy movies and stuff like that. And he even worked, with Marvel again because he did some of the X-Men movies too, as far as editing. But the thing is that as a director, maybe not the best. The couple of movies that he's just directed himself, not the greatest in the oeuvre, but the ones he's edited for are like literally among the top action films ever made. So it has a good look. There's some times where like he doesn't synthesize it all together. Like he makes big mistakes, like you don't put the right costume on Frank. You don't make sure that the plot flows logically from A to B to C, which is kind of also a director's job. That's not entirely on the writer. A lot of that happens in the filming and editing portion. Um, so, you know, I think if somebody brings him footage, he's a lot better at it than like going out and making sure he has all the pieces ready to play with. But uh I will say that the way he films the action in this, not bad for the constraints he was working with. Because it's always when they're trying to move the plot forward, like when it goes back, I feel so bad because it's not that I dislike Louis Gossett Jr. as a actor, far from it. But like whenever they go back to him and not Karen Page from last week, boy, those two suck up all the oxygen in the room. You just want to skip that scene.
I've said this before, the greatest actor in the world cannot save a movie from a bad script. But damn it, Louis Gossett Jr. is trying. He is not having a good time in this movie. Ha ha.
Yeah. Yeah, Louis Gossett Jr. wanders through this entire movie like, if I hit my mark, I get my paycheck. If I hit my mark, I get my paycheck. That's like the only thing in his brain. I swear, through this entire movie. And I do not know why he did not. I mean, maybe he did. Maybe I'm selling the man short and I shouldn't be. I don't know. I think you would have had to pay me more money than was involved in this movie for me to say lines like, Sam? your name is Sam, but you're a woman, which is like literally the first thing he says to, like, Nancy Everhard when she comes on. She's like, hey, I'm Sam, whatever her last name is. And he's like, but you are female. Sam am boy name. Like, I'm like, okay, they're showing that a character is misogynist, and then there's just showing that a character is, like, literally new to the planet Earth this very hour? Like, what is that line?
But you're also supposed to see him as that he was Frank's best friend. He saw Frank's family as his own family. And that one bit of, Sam is a boy's name kind of does take you out of that moment.
Because it's literally the first thing we kind of see about him is he has, like, two other, like, hello, I am generic cop character. Please tell me cop things. And then they're like, yes, cop things. And then he's like, I bet it was that Punisher. I think he's Frank Castle. And they're like, you are crazy. Frank Castle is dead. More generic cop line. And then he walks over and she's like, hi, my name is Sam. And he's like, but you are a woman. You have the boobies. And you're like, okay, this is literally the first thing I know about this guy. Like, the first thing out of his mouth is the dumbest line I have heard in a movie in ages. We literally have watched movies in the last couple of months in which characters are brand new to Earth and human ways that have said smarter lines than this. And the only thing she says that makes him go like, okay, fine, I'll overlook your womanness and allow you to work with me, is that she's like, by the way, I also think Frank Castle is the Punisher and is still alive. And then he's like, okay, show up at my office tomorrow and bring coffee. Like, and then the second she gets into his office, she's like, I will sit down and use the computer. And he's like, a computer? What you gonna do with that? You're gonna play Miss Pac-Man? First of all, it's Ms. Pac-Man. Thank you very much. Put some respect. But, like, he's like, computer is only good for computer game. Why would we use computer in cop building? Like, it's like literally this is the dumbest character. Oh my god, I'm like, you're Louis Gossett Jr. Do you have no respect for yourself, man? Like, did your kid need braces?
But yeah, that's kind of their thing, is that they need to find the Punisher. They believe that he is Frank Castle. And like the only semblance of the Punisher of his original comic anything is that he has a signature of throwing daggers with a skull on the handle. That is the closest we ever get to the Punisher's skull logo in this movie.
Which either Frank has an enormous stash of wealth somewhere, or he is really good at forging bespoke throwing knives. Because those things ain't cheap, and he goes through a lot of them. Also, this is the cleanest New York sewers have ever been.
Yeah. I mean, he should smell more, and they don't make no reference to whatever smell that he would have by living in the sewers for 5 years, especially if he's meditating naked.
Maybe that's how he keeps his clothes from smelling. He just like disrobes before he goes down into the sewers. We know that isn't true because we see him riding his motorcycle through the cavernous sewers of New York City, which are completely free of both garbage and sewage.
And rats and turtles.
I could have done with more turtles.
I mean, it's New York. You need some rats.
Yeah. There is weirdly a lot of pizza in this movie, though. For a movie without Ninja Turtles, this has a lot of pizza in it. It's not good-looking pizza.
No, it's like the mafia guys are getting their plan to take down the Yakuza, and Louis Gossett Jr. gets to drop on him as one of the mafia guys comes in and says, hey, our pizza's here, and just knocks him down and just takes the pizza for himself.
And first of all, he like punches the guy through the pizza, so the pizza scatters, goes all over the floor, and then he reaches down and picks it up off the floor, which was apparently an improv by Louis Gossett Jr.
5-second rule.
Yeah, punches the guy, picks up the pizza, and then he's like, "Thanks for the pizza," and like walks out the door, which is funny, but also it is like the worst looking pizza I've ever seen. That's not true. I did live in Chicago for 2 years, so
Hey!
I've seen worse. Come at me, Chicago. That ain't pizza. It's a
Uh-huh.
tomato sauce filled bread bowl. I will never let y'all live that down.
We're going to have words after this record.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, come on me. This may be our final episode of the podcast, but I will die on the hill of Chicago pizza is not pizza. Speaking of hills to die on, when the mafia, let's get back to this thin plot, which unlike pizza should be thicker. Thin is for pizza crust, not for movie plots. There you go. That is my official stance. When the mafia guys say they won't work for Lady Yakuza, whatever her name is, she is like, "Oh, really? Well, you will if I kidnap all of your children and hold them hostage." And apparently her plan is to sell them into servitude in another country, and there's some racism with that we're not going to get into. Let's just remind everybody it was the 80s, and hopefully we've learned slightly better since then.
And the mafia guys do say a few slurs towards the Yakuza. We're not going to work for you, and I'm not going to say the rest of that line.
Yeah, there is some casual 80s racism there towards basically just the general Asian and Middle Eastern populations of the world.
Also Italian, because he refers to them as having relations with sheep.
Just general casual racism for an action movie. I've seen way worse. We've talked about way worse on this podcast. It's weird. Anyway, I will say that one of the funniest scenes is they have the Yakuza set up in this like really awesome looking penthouse in this New York skyscraper, and you have a thing where like you see where she goes to like get to her like living quarters and her business office and everything, and like you get off the elevator and there's all these like ninja guys in there who are her guards. You know, it's all these Yakuza guards dressed up like ninjas with like rattan swords and everything, and they're practicing. And it looks amazing and well choreographed and everything. And then there is a point later on in the movie where, you know, after a lot of kerfuffle, the main mafia guy is like, "Hey, you know, the only person that's really left alive in all this to help me get my child back, because all the rest of the children, Frank gets the rest of the children fairly easily and takes out like half the Yakuza. And then he gets arrested by the cops trying to return the children, and they're like, haha, you kidnapped the children. He's like, I didn't. They're like, okay, but you killed 125 mafia guys. And he's like, okay, that I did do. That fair enough. You got me on that one. So the problem is that Lady Yakuza boss still has the son of the main mafia guy, and he's like, help me, Frank Castle. You're my only hope. I will break you out of jail, and we will agree to a one-time team up where we will be on the same side. We will save my son, and then we will go our separate ways. And Frank's like, yeah, cool, but you know I'm immediately putting one between your eyes, like the second your son is safe. And the guy's like, yeah, you can try, whatever. But they have this whole thing earlier where they set up like this like thing of the security of the Yakuza boss, and she's got all these ninjas, and it just has a scene where like the elevator doors open and Frank just like spray and pray the entire like 50 ninja guards that are just on the other side of that door who don't even know he's coming. And like all of them die without a fight. And it's one of the funniest scenes I've ever seen in an action movie. It's very much that Indiana Jones thing with the guy with the sword, and then Indy pulls out the gun and is just like, enough of this.
I was going to mention that, yeah, it is very much the Indiana Jones scene.
It's a vibe-based movie, but it's also something that Frank Castle would do. The one thing Frank Castle would never do, and this is another beef I got with the director of this movie, or maybe the writer of this movie, I don't know which one, let's just say both, is that right before they go into the building to like fight the last of the Yakuza and get the son of the mob boss back, he attempts to hand Frank body armor. Like he hands him a bulletproof vest. You know, the thing that the skull is usually painted on to draw the fire to the body armor instead of, to more fleshy areas of his body. Yeah. So the guy's like, just in case, here's a vest so that you might could make it through this fight we're about to have with 200 guys. And Frank Castle goes, yeah, no, I don't need body armor. Keep your bulletproof vest. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Frank Castle would never.
Because this is an 80s movie. Bulletproof vests are for pansies. I gotta be a real man.
It's not even said like that. It's just kind of like, no, thanks, I don't need it. Moving on. And I'm like, no, Frank Castle at this point in the comics is wearing like 4 layers of body armor and 150 belt pouches. Frank goes in fully kitted up.
If we're going by, his current look in the MCU, yeah, his skull is painted on a bulletproof vest.
That had always been what I had always heard growing up as the reasoning why Punisher had that giant skull on his chest, was that the in-comic explanation was it draws the eye and makes them go for center mass, and that's where I have my thick body armor on. You don't want them being like, let's go for like a headshot.
It's the Batman effect. That's why Batman at the time had the big yellow bat symbol in the chest. So that's could draw all the fire of the bullets.
Yeah, and so like growing up as a teenager, I was like, but isn't that precisely the reason why he has the skull in the comic books? Like at this very time as I'm watching this movie? I just gotta say that like the first like 2/3 of this movie kind of drags because not a great script. But the final act, like once the mob boss is like, hey, team up to go save my kid, and Frank's like, yeah, whatever, as long as I can take a shot at you afterwards. This becomes like a really watchable action film for like the last third of this movie. This is just a race to the finish for the final third.
It also has a bit of philosophy that you don't necessarily see in these kind of movies, which I like. Is like, Franco even says to Castle is that, killing me won't bring your family back. There's a limit to revenge. And Castle looks at him saying, I haven't found that yet.
Yeah, I haven't found my limit yet, which I think is a great line, and it's the most Frank Castle thing this version of the Punisher like does. It's the only time he really feels like the character. You could put that same line in John Barenthal's mouth in the MCU, and you'd be like, yeah, no, that fits.
Yeah, he's fully aware that he can kill every single mafioso in New York and it won't bring his family back. He doesn't care. He wants to take them all down, and he will have his revenge on each and every single one of them.
The thing that the Caravan of Garbage guys kept bringing up in their review of this film was the reminder that Frank Castle is like the least liked character in the Marvel universe. We're not talking about like the MCU or anything, like, but just like the Marvel Comics universe.
Because he kills.
It's not just because he kills, it's also because he's kind of an a-hole to everybody. Like everybody else is like, oh, they may be tough on the outside or what, like Deadpool, like Deadpool's kind of like, he makes a lot of crass jokes and whatever, but like, you kind of get under the surface of that, and he's like a giant, gushy teddy bear filled with candy, like, you're like, aw.
Wolverine would be another example. He has this big, tough guy, bub exterior, but he'll be the father figure for all of the kids at the school.
Of women like that, like Emma Frost, I would say, is also like that. She has this very like tough exterior, ha ha ha, okay, make your jokes. But personality wise, underneath that, she does also have a kind of maternal kind of energy and stuff to a lot of characters. Same thing with Storm. She seems very, off-putting, but we've discussed that before. It's because, her powers come from emotional regulation. So she seems very, like, distant and disaffected until you get to know her.
One of my favorite Emma Frost moments in the comics is when she finds out Spider-Man's identity, and she stops and goes, "You were just a boy."
Yeah, this is a child.
Spider-Man is just this teenager. I never knew that. Oh my God.
Yeah, and I mean, minor spoilers for a trailer that's been out for a couple of weeks now, but if you've seen the Spider-Man trailer that's been released for the next movie, Frank Castle in that movie absolutely knows who Peter Parker is. Peter calls him Frank, and Frank says Peter back or calls him Pete or something like that in the thing. He knows exactly who he is. He knows his age. He knows this is just like a kid, like right out of high school. He knows everything about his situation. And then Spider-Man's like, "Can we not fight?" And what does Frank do? Bang, bang, pow. It's like immediately, like, no hesitation. It's just, you are in my way between me and my target.
Peter just saying, "What the hell, Frank?" That completely is the perfect representation of their relationship.
But it's also Frank Castle's relationship to literally everyone in the Marvel Universe. They kind of don't really get that same edge, which really I feel is kind of sad because it's not that Dolph Lundgren couldn't have pulled it off. It's just, once again, even the best actor in the world couldn't, do. And, Dolph Lundgren's a serviceable actor, but it's like they gave him nothing to do. This Frank Castle is like really two-dimensional.
But like I said, that one moment where Franco asks him, where's his limit? Where does it end? And not even Castle knows where it's going to end. It may never end. His revenge against criminals may not have an end. He'll, even after he takes out the mafia, he might go after some other criminal as revenge for losing his family.
Or as some twisted sense of justice. This last third of the movie is a sprint to the end, and it is filled with great action set pieces. It kind of starts with that, like, elevator opening and them just mowing down all the unsuspecting ninjas that have been kind of set up earlier in the movie as like, oh, this is going to be a horrible thing for them to fight whenever Frank gets here. And then it's like, nope, that's super easy, barely an inconvenience, as a YouTuber we love says. Then he has to face, a couple of lower level henchmen, and this is really where Dolph Lundgren gets to shine because they ditched the gunplay for a while and they just let him do like his karate on a couple of like random underlings. And that is possibly the best fight choreography in the entire film.
If this was a video game, it would be like just a beat 'em up, going through all the goons before you get to the boss. And in this case, like, the sub boss is the unnamed mute daughter. And in that Caravan of Garbage video, they make a point that usually in these kind of movies, you introduce a female character, and usually that female character can fight in an action movie and would have a one-on-one fight with at least one of the female villains. And we don't get that. What we get is Castle killing the daughter.
Yeah, they introduce Nancy Everhard as like, I am Detective Sam, whatever her last name is, and, oh, Sam is top of the class, and I made the highest target points at the shooting range, and, generic cop accolades, and all this kind of stuff. They really push, like, she's the best cop on the force. She gets to do precisely nothing in the last third of this movie.
Her and Louis Gossett Jr. have been written out of this movie. The most Louis Gossett Jr. does in this movie is while he's questioning Castle about, all the 100 something murders he's done, mafia guys come in, they threaten his life. Because if they threaten Frank's life, he's not going to care. Shoot me, whatever. I don't care. But they threaten Louis Gossett Jr., and it's like, okay, then he punches the mafia guy, he punches the pizza guy, and that's the last bit of action we see of him until the end, where he gets the police to Lady Tanaka's floor, her loft or whatever, and that's after all the action's over.
Yeah, and that's more to do than Sam does as a character.
And as for this mute daughter, I get that it's supposed to be a big, shocking reveal, but the problem is, okay, for most of this movie, including her final fight scene, her hair is all tied up. Her hair is up very much like her mother's is for the whole movie. And it's supposed to be this big reveal that she is in fact just a skilled assassin. So like she's leading the ninja, she beats up Frank Castle, she kicks his ass, and then she takes her mask off to reveal her face. I did not connect that this was supposed to be the daughter because she's not wearing the makeup she wore earlier in the movie, and her hair is down. So it's unrecognizable to me, but that's supposed to be the big reveal that the mute American daughter is actually this skilled assassin.
Well, here is the thing to me, because it's been like a good 20 years since I've seen this movie, probably. So I had forgotten like what little plot there was. When the Yakuza are first introduced, they send in these like, frogmen scuba divers or whatever, and they've got their faces all covered, well, their bodies all covered and everything. But it's like, they're all in wetsuits, so it's like, giant buff guy, giant buff guy, giant buff guy, small lady with a really form-hugging wetsuit that shows off all of her curves. And I mean, wetsuits will do that. I'm not saying they won't, but like, this is very definitely a designed costume to be like, giant henchman, giant henchman, giant henchman, woman. And so I'm sitting there watching the movie and I'm like, okay, we've literally seen like 2 women so far. So it's either got to be like Lady Tanaka, or the, cop chick is going to turn out to be like working on the other side or something. And then they reveal like, oh, she's got a mute daughter who kind of dresses like an assassin in every bad 80s action movie and follows her mom around everywhere. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's got to be the chick, because it's like so obvious that it's like, we have a crew of 12 people and all of them are 6 foot tall buff men, and then there's a 4 foot tall woman.
Yeah, it's like, in the end of this movie here, it's like, let's get every Asian stereotype that we can, because like Lady Tanaka, she's in a geisha outfit with geisha makeup and she's doing Tai Chi, and it's like, we're just going to throw every Asian stereotype we can think of, whether it makes sense or not.
Yeah, let's have the ninjas in here, even though that doesn't really make sense. And then we'll have like a couple of guys doing karate. At least that makes sense if you know that like Dolph Lundgren is a karate black belt. So at least that will, sort of make sense outside the movie. And the thing is, though, is I will give the fight with the like assassin daughter character a couple of points. Is one, she has these really awesome earrings that also work as like tiny daggers. And I'm like, I kind of want those earrings, because what a great everyday carry, like, like these like stealth, like ninja daggers that are, but knowing me, I would slice myself open with those things on a daily basis if I tried to wear them.
Yeah, when she takes him off and throws him at the one mafia guy who didn't take the drink, to just nail him to the wall.
Yeah. I mean, pretty literally nail him to the wall too. I mean, she literally like goes through his hand and secures him to the wall. But in her final fight, she uses them against Frank. She injures him, it bloodies him for the real final battle, and all. But the funniest thing to me about that is she also has a dagger hidden in her shoe. Now we're used to seeing this with like James Bond villains and stuff. The thing is that usually when you have like a dagger in a shoe, it's literally like a kick dagger. It's supposed to be on the point of your toe so that it can like come out at the point of your toe. And when you do a forward kick, it's a force multiplier, right? No, this chick, hers swings out to the side of her stylish footwear. And then she has to do like these really awkward, like roundhouse sidekicks trying to like hit Frank with her shoe knife.
Swinging her foot at Frank's leg while he's choking her.
Yeah, that is funny. That is super funny. He's got her in a chokehold and she's just like wildly swinging her foot behind her, like trying to figure out like, where is the knife on this stupid shoe and how do I stab his leg with it? But the most hilarious part of that is that the prop on the shoe, like when it's not the hero prop, where it's like, look how shiny this shoe dagger is. When it's just on the actress or the stunt double as they're fighting, it's just like a little rubber, dagger blade that is made for, stunts. And it keeps flopping everywhere as she moves around. And eventually it flops under her foot as she lands one of her kicks and she steps on it. And it breaks. And apparently they just didn't have it in the budget to go back and be like, we need to replace that and reshoot the. So she spends the rest of the fight with this just like floppy shoe dagger, this like rubber blade just hanging off the side of her foot. And when Frank finally dispatches her just by snapping her neck, which is kind of just like, once again, it's the Indiana Jones joke. It's just kind of like, okay, I'm done with you. You're boring now. She falls over, and the way that she falls just kind of like really emphasizes the little floppy shoe dagger that's hanging off of her shoe. And I laughed so hard at that part of the movie. So thank you, movie, for that laugh. The final battle is kind of between not Frank and Lady Tanaka like you would think. Because Lady Tanaka is holding the kid that they're there to rescue, Tommy, at knife point. And she's trying to get Franco to off himself and do the dirty work for her, with the promise of, I will let your son go once you are dead.
And forcing his son to watch his father die.
Yeah, that's like her two-pronged plan. And then Frank, who is injured from dealing with like assassin daughter, just like busts through the paper walls because it's a Japanese Yakuza, headquarters. So of course it has to have paper walls. And just like throws a dagger in between her eyes and she just like falls over.
It's glass. He busts through glass. It's a glass wall.
Oh, there are many moments of him busting through paper walls during this scene, so I got a little confused. But you're right, the final one is glass.
He just takes one of the shards and just throws it at her head.
Yeah, and he just dispatches her like so quick. Like they don't even get a final battle, and I'm like, okay. Like he doesn't even say two words to her. He just kind of like ah, and then he like throws a thing at her head.
No action movie one-liner, and just throw that at her head and boom, dead.
Yeah, and she doesn't get like, any sort of quip as she dies or anything. Like she just falls over and everything because the real final battle has to be between Frank and the mafia guy, who of course has turned on his promise to Frank. The promise was, we rescue my son and then we go our separate ways, and we both leave the place alive. And immediately he's like, son, go out of the room. Dad has some business to attend to. Okay, Frank, you're gonna die.
Yeah, and he, is like, I'll see you in hell. But then the kid comes back to, Dad, don't.
Not Frank. Frank's my buddy. You gotta hand it to the kid, though. The kid is like the only good character in this movie as far as like morally good.
Like, we haven't talked about it, but when the kids are kidnapped, he kind of stands up for the kids. The kids kind of make fun of him because he's the private school kid, so they don't think he's tough. My dad's a mafia boss. He taught me how to be tough. And your dad and your dad sent you to a private school and you're a wuss. But he stands up for the kids as the Yakuza is kind of trying to scare him or just outright abuse them. He's standing up and saying, you can't do this because you can't do this to these kids. You can't do it to this little girl.
I mean, he totally heel turn, like folding chair to the back. One guy, like he fully throws himself. He is one of the wimpiest kids in the group, just from physical looks. We've been told like he doesn't even know that his dad is a criminal, but other kids are in trouble, so he rushes to help. Like that's who this kid is, and he does it even though like he does it against a couple of bullies within the child group. They're bullying other kids before the guards get there, as they're all like locked in a room together. And so he stands up to the bullies, and then when the Yakuza get there, like he tries to just like claw Lady Tanaka's eyes out like the second he sees her. She's like, come to me, little children, I will give you sweets. And then he's like, no, you're a villain. So I mean, shout out to Tommy.
Once Frank rescues the kid, it's Tommy that realizes, hey, wait a minute. The little one isn't here. We need to go back for her. We can't leave her behind.
And she went back for her dolly.
But yeah, in that moment at the end where he like, Dad, don't kill Frank. He saved us. Don't do it. That's enough of an opening for Frank to get the upper hand on Franco. Even his own son is getting on his back trying to pull him off to stop him from trying to kill Frank Castle. Which again is enough of an opening and it's for Frank to get one shot in. Now, despite the fact that Mr. Franco here is wearing a bulletproof vest, Castle is able to shoot in the exact spot to get underneath the vest.
I will say that kind of annoys me. Once again, not great writing, but the thing about it is that this immediately leads into my favorite scene of the movie, bar none, which is Frank taunts a 10-year-old into trying to kill him.
Yeah, little Tommy, he just saw his father get shot and killed. And partially his own fault because he's just trying to protect Frank Castle. But Tommy immediately picks up the gun after his father just got killed and says, I'll kill you. And like, Frank Castle turns around and says, yeah, go ahead. Do it. Kneels in front of Tommy, pulls the gun to his own head, extends his arm and says, go ahead, shoot. And it's a great Frank Castle moment because it shows that he just doesn't care. If he dies in this moment, he doesn't really care.
I mean, it's kind of mission accomplished for Frank anyway, and he's already told his former partner. There's a scene with Louis Casa Jr. in the jail where he's like, Frank, you gotta give me something, they're gonna send you to the electric chair. And Frank's like, I don't care. Like, I literally have nothing to live for except for revenge at this point. So if I'm not going to be able to do any more revenge, then you might as well just end my life. Like, I have one reason for living, and if I can't do that, then, might as well not be here. The kid's saying, like, well, I'll kill you for what you just did. He follows it up with the line, good, because if you do it now, you may not grow up to be like him. In other words, if you get this spirit of revenge, if you get this thing inside of you that I know has eaten me up, and I know ate your dad up, this need for violence and this need, if you just end me now and you're like, okay, I got the guy that got my dad, and maybe this will end. He says, if you get it out of your system now, maybe you will not grow up to be like your dad. And the implication is also, and maybe you won't grow up to be like me. But of course the kid can't do it. It's a 10-year-old. They're not even in a movie this weird, they're not gonna have a 10-year-old be like, that's like maybe a Tarantino move and nobody else,
Yeah.
The kid drops the gun and he like cries and falls into Frank's chest, and Frank does the kind of sort of fatherly thing of like, there.
He looks at Tommy and says, "You're a good kid. Grow up to be a good man."
Yeah. And then, of course, because he's Frank Castle, and this is a thing Frank Castle would do, he says, because if you don't, I'm still going to be out there and I'm going to come back for you. Like, it's not just like a good job, kid. Hope you grow up with the right kind of morals. It's like, no. There is a not just implicit threat, there is an explicit threat there of Frank going like, I will be watching you as you grow up, and if you do not grow up to be a moral person, I will come back. And then he basically doesn't even bother to say goodbye to his former partner. He just leaves back to the sewer with him, back to naked meditating.
I do like the naked meditation scenes in that it's him basically praying to God. Like, why do innocent people suffer and the guilty walk free? Which is a very Punisher line to say. And then at the end where he says he doesn't know if what he's doing is right or wrong, because he still doesn't understand why the innocent have to suffer and the guilty walk free. He's still waiting for that answer, an answer that will likely never come.
But as long as there are evildoers, there will always be the Punisher. Da-da-dome.
There apparently was plans for a sequel. Like, despite the fact that this wouldn't get released in the States until 2 years later, it made enough money during that original 89 theatrical run that New World was considering a second film. It wouldn't happen because of the studio's own financial issues. But would Dolph Lundgren come back for it? If that was the case, I don't know.
Apparently they did have, I heard or read somewhere during the course of my research that they had a script at one point, or at least like the beginnings of it, they had a pitch, and Dolph Lundgren was like, yeah, nah. So I think there was like a very short time where the studio was still stable enough that they might have done it, and that the, writer and director may have had something for them to do. But I think that, like, Dolph Lundgren was just really like, no, that was a thing I did. It wasn't very good. I was not very passionate about it. So let's move on and let me do other movies that I will be more interested in. Like we said earlier, he's more passionate about it now. Like, now if you see Dolph Lundgren somewhere and you're like, hey, it's the Punisher, he'll be like, absolutely, yes, I am.
Hey, it's He-Man. And yeah, again, it's one of those things. It's like Michael Keaton now. 10, 20 years ago, Michael Keaton would I did Batman and it was over. But now he will say, I am Batman with no problems. He has embraced that legacy of being Batman to the point where he came back and reprised the character. So it's one of those things that I guess time heals all wounds. So it might feel like in the moment they weren't really proud of that movie, but as the years go on, as the fans have loved these movies and, and want to talk about these movies with the actors, that they say, okay, I can embrace this legacy and kind of have fun with it. And as you said, Dolph Lundgren would kind of reprised the characters for skits and commercials internationally and posing with fans in a Punisher t-shirt. So it's like, he's kind of embraced it over the years. But yeah, as for this movie, whether this movie has the magic or not, in my opinion, as a generic 80s action movie, it does. As a Punisher movie, no. And it's weird for me to say that, because if this was not called The Punisher, if this character was not called Frank Castle, it would have been just a generic 80s action movie that probably would have been forgotten to time. But because this is called The Punisher, because the main character is called Frank Castle, it's always going to have that thing over it, that cloud over it.
So if this movie was called, like, Bob Johnson, the Kickinator, you would be like, yeah, this is a fun movie.
Kind of. Yeah. Like I said, it would have been just another generic 80s action movie that, you'll rent on a Friday night when you're in high school and college.
Or, it's one of those where you're like me and you're like, this was on TV all the time when I was a teen. I absolutely watched the crap out of this film.
Yeah. So like I said, that's my thing, is that as a Punisher movie, no magic. But if this was a generic 80s action movie, I would have a higher opinion of it.
I think my answer for both generic action movie and also Punisher movie is it has 1/3 of the magic. Like, that final third of the movie, that last act, once the mob boss and Frank team up to go save the guy's kid, it becomes both a pretty decent Punisher movie and a really, really good 80s action movie.
All right. I guess you can move on from this point, right?
Yep.
As for next week, our next Marvel Before Marvel Studios movie.
Wait, Tuesday. I have an idea. For our next Marvel movie, can we put our faith in Blast Hard Cheese?
Fridge Large Meat?
Bulk Slab Thrust.
Big McLarge Huge!
There's no outdoing Big McLarge Huge. You got me.
Yeah, that Reb Brown, Mr. Space Mutiny himself, for you MST3K lovers out there, and did a Captain America movie in 1979. And we're going to be talking about that movie. Yes, it's the one where he wears the motorcycle helmet. It's the one where he throws the plastic shield.
It's the Red Browniest. By God, I've been wanting Reb Brown on this podcast for ages, and we're finally going to have us some Reb Brown.
So come back next week for Reb Brown in Captain America, and we will talk to you all next time. Bye.
Bye.
Don't let the magic stop here.
Keep the conversation going. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at Rewatching the Magic.
We are also on Blue Sky, rewatchingthemagic.bsky.social. And new episodes are available at rewatchingthemagic.podbean.com and youtube.com/@rewatchingthemagic. Remember, the magic is for everyone.
It only stops if you let it.
We know that right now, things are tough.
But in the words of Jim Henson, the only way the magic works is by hard work. But hard work can be fun.
Check out our show notes for ways that you can help.